podcast for those who suffer, which is everyone.
It's a space where we can speak honestly about what it feels like to be in desolate places without losing hope.
Welcome to In the Thicket.
Welcome back, friends, to the second episode of our Lenten series. Last week, in case you missed it, we talked about desolation and our own experiences of desolation. And this week we're talking about Mother Teresa and her experience of intense and prolonged desolation. We'll also share about some things that have helped us when we're in times of desolation, and we hope that it's helpful for you. God bless you.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Desolation. Well, my name is Erin.
I'm Rachel.
I'm Nicole.
And we are your hosts from In the Thicket podcast. So welcome back to everybody. What do you
That sounds like a game show. Like, we are the hosts of In the Thicket podcast.
It's true, honestly.
Maybe it could be a game show. Could there be a game show about suffering?
I think so.
Who
I think it would be a
suffers
hit.
the most?
That's right. We could have a contest.
That's like the worst.
I
I'm
know,
sorry.
it is one
The
of the worst.
therapist in me is just like, sorry. I'm gonna stop. Okay.
That's okay. That's okay. Okay. So
Anyways,
welcome
yes.
back to everybody. If you are just joining us for the first time, or if you weren't able to listen to last week's episode, which was the first episode in Lent, we would invite you to go back and listen to that, because probably what we're sharing today might make a little bit more sense.
They're kind of like connected mini episodes.
Connected mini episodes. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you can listen to that one for an overview about desolation and our experience of desolation. But
Also, like, if you have just stumbled upon our podcast and you are starting to listen to a podcast on suffering in Lent, talking about desolation, like,
you're a super Catholic.
you or something, like, you're in the right place.
That's right. Yes.
At the right time.
Congratulations to you. Yes. This is good.
Yes, very
Okay.
good.
So before today we're going to talk about Mother Teresa. So we're going to talk about her experience of desolation, which is not the typical experience of desolation for sure, but there's some really beautiful things that we can take from it, I think. And we'll talk about what helps us in times of desolation. But just as a recap, just to talk about, or just to situate us for what we're talking about, if we're talking about desolation and consolation, those are movements of the soul that were typically kind of described by Saint Ignatius, and then lots of people have written on those over time. But he describes desolation as the contrary of the above, which is consolation, that feeling that your heart and soul is lifted to God and you can love nothing else but God alone. So it's the opposite, the contrary of that, such as darkness of soul, disturbance in it, movements to things low and earthly, the unquiet of different agitations and temptations, moving to want of confidence, without hope, without love, when one finds oneself all lazy, tepid, sad, and as if separated from his creator and Lord. So I feel like I just need to say that very dramatically.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So so that is Ignatius's kind of description of desolation. And then do you maybe want to, because you do a good job talking about Mother Teresa, Rachel, do you want to kind of share with everybody that experience?
Rachel was a personal friend of Mother Teresa.
That's right.
Yes, that'd be so cool. No, yeah, a few people in my life, which we've talked about before, have met her and knew her. Some people knew her well. But yeah, so Mother Teresa, we've probably heard of her. I can't imagine anyone who hasn't heard of her. But if you haven't heard of her, she's a saint of the Catholic Church, and she's an Albanian sister who came to India, and she was a Loretta sister for a while, and then she had this incredible. I mean, she's always very holy, but had this incredible experience and call from God to found a new community, which is the Missionaries of Charity. And that was, I think she was like, it was middle age. She was like maybe in her 40s or something like that when she received that call. She called it her call within a call. And it just was these sort of locutions and these experiences just kept insisting on her sort of leaving her order and founding this new order. And it was like a road paved with suffering. And
Sorry,
she
I'm just gonna interrupt because we were just, if you're watching the video of this on YouTube, that was the best. So anybody who's listening,
Nicole was like,
just ran out of the room
Nicole.
at
Okay.
one point. Okay.
Yeah, I just remembered that we also post this on YouTube. So hi everyone.
yeah. I mean, I kept going. I was,
Yeah.
It was good. I could hear
professional.
you. I could hear you in my headphones. I'm cooking and I just wanted to make sure that the kitchen was not burning
Burned down.
Yeah,
Everything
totally.
is fine. Everything is fine.
It was just
That's all.
amazing because Nicole ran and like slid on her socks in the hallway. It was so great. And then she just like ran past the hallway. It was
all
great.
the
And
time
then she,
listening to
ran-
like Mother Teresa. La, la,
Yeah.
la, la, la.
So
I
I'm
was-
trying to
I was
listen to
listening.
Rachel, but
I'm so
Nicole was
sorry.
much more entertaining in that moment. But anyways, okay, good. Sorry, go.
But yeah.
Back to Mother Teresa. Yes.
So back to the story. So basically, she's this call within the call. She leaves the Loretto sisters, and she founds, and like it was a lot of trouble. She had to like get permission from her bishop, and everybody was kind of like, I think you're a little crazy. What's going on? But she finally, all those things fell into place, and she founded this new order. Thing is, so before she founded the order, lots of like deep, mystical, incredible experiences of God. Almost immediately after she founded the Missionaries of Charity and began this extremely like, and she even talks about like she actually experienced in some ways homelessness and like poverty in ways that were very close to the people that she was serving, especially in the early days. And so it's like in that moment of leaving everything behind that she loved being a Loretto sister, just to found this order, that consolation experience of God just stopped, the vision sort of ended. And she began to experience this extreme spiritual dryness, like a very, very intense spiritual dryness that lasted decades. So like it wasn't just 1 year, 2 years, it was years and years. And people have talked about this, and I don't really know. I don't have the expertise about this. Like people have said she might have been suffering from something clinical like depression and stuff like that. I'm not sure. But what I do know, and what I think is is very difficult to explain just by sort of a mental health perspective on this, is that she suffered this desolation, but it did not impact
Right.
in the least any part of her life of loving God.
Yeah.
Like it did not interrupt her prayer life. It did not interrupt her mission. It didn't even interrupt her joy. Like she was an extremely energetic and joyful person to everybody who met and knew her.
Yeah.
And she radiated that joy. Like that's a lot of people would say that, like she just radiated this joy. So the mystery of her desolation was very mysterious, and it was mysterious to her as well. And she was quite, I mean, this is her personality type, I think, as well, but she's quite extreme. So there's a beautiful book called Come Be My Light.
Yes, I was just gonna say.
Collection of her letters and some journal entries and things like that, which I think she didn't want published. Like she never wanted that stuff, but in God's providence, we have this book. And you read in the book her incredible pain. I have the book. I started reading it when I was like 20, and I only got through maybe a quarter of it because it's so intense. Her suffering is so intense. I literally couldn't read past that because I was like, it was so impactful for me.
Yeah.
It did actually. Because I mean, I have this funny story, which is that like, basically I thought that when God gives saints the grace in quotes to suffer, that they just never felt the suffering. It was like, it was kind of like Saint Stephen on the grill, that legend, and he's like, turn me over so that I'm done on the other side.
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
like,
Saint Lawrence.
Saint Lawrence. Sorry, not Saint Stephen.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I thought like that was what it meant to have the grace to suffer. And then I still read until I was 20. I thought that. And then I read her book and I was like, wait a second. No.
What does this mean?
What is this? Like she really felt this like to her core. And I'll wrap up, but like two really other important things were in her spiritual direction. So she kept up her spiritual direction, which is very helpful when you're in times of desolation, I think. Yeah. And in her spiritual direction, she received a kind of insight at one point after a while of this extreme experience of desolation. Her spiritual director said, it's possible she was experiencing Christ's desolation on the cross, or Christ's sort of a loneliness on the cross. And that was her spirituality in that moment. That was her journey with God, that she was consoling the Lord by joining herself to him on the cross. And that gave her in some ways a great consolation. Like it didn't lift the desolation. The other thing, which I was saying was her personality, I think, is that she really, which I cannot do, she tried not to cry very much. So she said very often, like, I didn't even let one tear fall. It was like a victory for her. And I was like, that's intense, Mother Teresa. I don't know how you did that. And not everybody's called to that, but I think she just felt called to sort of surrender in a very deep way to God, where she would not let her desolation take any choice. Like even her crying was like a choice for her, and she would choose not to cry, which is not something I'm recommending, but it's just a really interesting, just to kind of get a picture of her personality and her experience.
Yeah.
I feel and that's, sorry, I was just going to say, and this is something I've been thinking about more lately, that like, like she's a Saint Mother Teresa. She's a canonized saint, correct? Right. So she's, but that doesn't, and so that means she's somebody who's demonstrated heroic virtue, and there's all kinds of things that somebody has to have demonstrated to become canonized a saint. It doesn't mean that she was perfect just on a human level, right? So like crying is psychologically healthy. Maybe that could have been healthy for her. Who knows, right? So it's like there's all these things where we don't have to look at everything, every little thing that she did in her life and say this is how one ought to live.
Right.
And yet she is a canonized saint because she has demonstrated heroic virtue. Anyways, just
no, I think that's really important.
It's
we
very
are not
interesting,
against crying.
Well, that's true. We're not against crying. I find it, even when you're talking about how she that she, in the midst of all of that, maintained all of the things that she was doing, like her prayer life, her outreach to people, her joy, her, all of those kind of things were maintained. And I found, so when I had described in the last episode that I had about, it was like 8 or 9 months of really intense desolation, like really, really intense desolation. And I had found during that time that it was that way in terms of prayer life. Like there was a grace that I couldn't explain. Like even though I would sit with the Lord for an hour in adoration and I would feel nothing, like he would say things to me, like I could hear his voice and I would feel nothing. Like it's the weird, like it was the weirdest thing, because it's like you hear, like, right, when you sit with the Lord and he says something to you, there's always like something in the heart that's like responds to that, and that's beautiful and good and like joyful and like, well, usually anyways, but in that experience it was like there was not like no it was like it was deprived of feeling, even though I knew that it was the Lord, and the grace to go to all of those prayer times and like to be faithful to those things and not to walk around like I didn't at the time walk around like a mopey dopey, and like just be and I don't know how that, because it was a time, like it was a lot of suffering. But I also found too, like even when you were saying about reading the book and not being able to go far into it, I remember reading that book at the time and I devoured it, like every word. And it was the same for St. John of the Cross, because I started to read at one point Dark Night of the Soul, which is a St. John of the Cross classic, right? And I read it when I was not in a time of desolation, and I only got like a chapter and I was like, whoa, this is
this is a lot
ridiculous. And I don't like I think I even remember thinking like something like, I don't know, this sounds a little far-fetched to me. and then when I read that when I was in that time of desolation, and it was like everything clicked, and that's even like, that was one of the things about the podcast of like wanting to have people's stories and to share, because there's something about that, about when you are experiencing something, hearing that echoed from the mouth or the heart of somebody else, that is a consolation, even if it doesn't bring consolation.
That's right. It's like an encouragement, like a deep encouragement. And even the tears, like, to, I guess, not to sort of labor on the point of her not crying, but I think what I had never understood when I first read that was that one of the things that she was doing was saying, like, I think she really understood her desolation very deeply. Like she really allowed God to sort of speak into that place. And it's really interesting when you read her letters, like she wasn't obsessed with it. She really tried to not sort of overthink it and overanalyze it, but she would continue to bring it to the Lord through her spiritual director. So it was always with the help of someone else. And then in her life, I think she really just wanted not to let that be, which is why maybe she didn't want her letters and stuff published. She didn't want that to be a defining
Right.
aspect of her life. So the way for, I think, for us to take it when we understand that is to understand like the reason that it wasn't for her, even though it was her main spiritual experience for decades, but she did not understand that to be her defining sort of moment, is because for her, even that experience was defined by God's love for her and by her love for him. Like, it's very clear that she understands that fact, even when she cannot connect to it in her feelings and in her emotions or in her spirit. Is she knows it in a level at a level even deeper than that. And so it's just like this reminder that, like, that part, that famous St. Paul passage, like neither death nor height, nor present, nor future, nor,
principalities.
Exactly. All of those things that we think are insurmountable barriers between us and the Lord are nothing to God. And I think she knew that it's such a deep way that for her desolation was this gift of her life that she was giving back to the Lord,
Yeah. And even like, even if she didn't know that it was the love of God in some moments, or didn't know that intellectually, because it was a complete dark night of the sense, like all the senses, like she could feel it emotionally and probably even intellectually sometimes.
She doubted,
she doubted,
for sure.
And all of these things. And yet her actions show that the love of God was still impacting her and was the driving force that she drank each day in prayer and lived out. And it's such a beautiful thing of like, I don't know, I'm thinking a lot about the scripture, like lean not on your own understanding, like in the sense that there was nothing for her to understand because all she had was nothingness. And so she was leaning on Christ in the truest way because she couldn't even perceive that she was leaning on Christ. She just was living that, which is kind of like wild.
It is wild. I love that. Wild, she just was like, she couldn't perceive it, but she was, it was almost deeper in her lack of being able to perceive it. It was just like,
which makes sense because that's
everything.
St. John of the Cross, when he talks about, because there's two like really particularly deep experiences of desolation. One is a dark night of the sense, and the other is a dark night of the soul. Like those are the two things that he describes. And a dark night of the sense is where, like you don't have any feelings of consolation. It's like a very intense, but it's like a very intense part of that. And then, but a dark night of the soul is something where, like that's more of like what she experienced of like a lack of grounding of like even though there's a sureness, it still comes with doubt. Like it still comes with like, am I pleasing to you? Like, am I doing the, like, do you love me? Like, do you, like, even though there is a surety there, there's not a surety.
There's a real experience.
There's a real experience. It's like you say, Rachel, like like the saints are in that experience of deep desolation. It really is like, it's an actual suffering. It's an actual suffering. Yeah. And one of the things I found, because I'd like to hear from you guys, what helps you in when you experience desolation, like either a more extended or, just kind of the more little ups and downs. I find for me, one of the things that helped a lot was when I read St. John of the Cross, and he describes desolation, like some of the more intense experiences, as that the Lord is actually closer to us in those times, but it's that it's like we become a log that's on fire, and so it's not just like, just a little kindling, whatever, but it's like we are that log that is being consumed. Like, when the log gets like with the embers on the inside, and it's like, and that's when the log is at its hottest, and everything of it is being, but like every part of the log is on fire, and it's like, which makes total sense, because if you think of that, like of just the purity and the goodness and the beauty of God's love, that like having him come so close to us in that purity, it illuminates every part of our heart that is not pure, and then we can see it and perceive, and that's like, there's something that's very disorienting about that. And it also like it's like we feel and see our insufficiency, which I feel like that does happen in times of desolation. It's like it brings up a lot of those questions, of like, I'm not feeling God. What did I do something, or did I, like, even in a practical way sometimes, yeah. So that helped me
That's
to
good.
kind of be like, okay, God is closer now.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think that, with the Mother Teresa example, what's important to point out is and I could be wrong with this, but I think she had like calling to sort of be a sort of sacrificial soul, like Padre Pio had that calling in a different way. And so certain saints have that calling, or I think for her, she perceived it like she was called to like be so intimate with Christ on the cross to comfort and console him there. And that was her particular. So like one of the things that helps me is, you said it earlier, Ignatius talks about this, is that your desolations typically are supposed to end. Like they're not supposed to be, and hers obviously did, like she's in heaven with Jesus, but typically even in this life, they're not supposed to be sort of long standing forever things. And it's not even to think like, oh, this is going to end, but just to know that like, what is my calling? Like maybe like not to get attached in an idolatrous kind of way to the desolation in a way, is like to be free enough with it to be like, Lord, I want to love you. I do love you in the midst of this doubt and fear and all this stuff. And, bring it in your mercy, bring it to pray for the end of it is a good thing. And I never used to do that before, but in a recent experience in the last sort of year or so, one of my parents was kind of encouraging me in that way. And I realized I needed that encouragement, because I realized, God was telling me my act of hope in this time of desolation is to pray and trust that it is not my whole life that will be this way.
Right.
And it was a big act of hope for me to make to make that prayer, to say that prayer. Because that was where God was saying, do you trust me that you will not always be in this place?
Yeah.
And there was a new freedom for me to be like, yes, Lord, like I do, I can trust you. Like I can make that prayer, in trust. So I think that's also, again and again, this came from my parents. So I think I will say, for the thing that helps me, I think other people that I trust who know me well and who love the Lord are an immense help to me in times of desolation, to help me sort of sometimes see myself where I'm sort of blind a little bit by what's going on,
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. What helps you, Nicole?
I think what helps me often is being able to first name an experience as desolation. Like even last night, just like in terms of little ups and downs, I think I was really tired because it had been on a flight, had a busy weekend. I was hungry. It was just I had worked. It was just a whole combination of things, and I started just feeling really irritable and feeling like viewing all my life negatively. And then I was just like starting to feel all this despair, and all of a sudden I was like, and then there was like temptations. There was temptations to anger that were out of place, and just all the things. And it was helpful for me to say, I'm in a place of desolation in this moment, and I don't have to give into those temptations. This is not something leading me to be like, yeah, you know what? I gotta bring this issue up with my husband or whatever it is, like, actually, let's just pause for a second, so naming it as desolation, and then eating some food and getting a good sleep and doing some prayer and doing all those things to like actually take care of my body, and then waking up and being like, oh yeah, okay, it's fine,
Yeah.
So sometimes that's helpful, and that's in the little way, or in a long term of just like, okay, I'm in a period of desolation. What does that mean for my actions? Okay, I'm not going to make big decisions right now. I'm going to go to counseling to see if there are some psychological things that are connected to this that I need to work through. I'm going to be in spiritual direction so that I can help continue to identify what can I do in this time, or all those kinds of things. So I think those kinds of things are helpful, of just, and also like I am not going, like Ignatius says, don't scrimp. That is not the time to like skimp on your prayer. Like be faithful in prayer. Which often is the hardest one, because sometimes it's the thing that you least,
that's
or
exactly
I least feel like doing.
Totally. You don't want to sit there and feel nothing for an extra time.
Right. It's like, okay, if there's nothing else I do today, I need to pray. Like that is,
No, it's
true. I think all those things.
It's awesome. I love it. And I love it too, because you even bring up a good point too of like, there's natural desolation and natural consolation, which are not always spiritual desolation and spiritual consolation, but they can very often lead to it, right? So like,
Right.
it's exactly like when you're talking about, because even when you were talking about like, okay, I'm hungry, I'm feeling da-da-da, and then you talk about like it's going to like despair, and then it starts going into like those kind of
Yeah.
things. Like it's so that's also what I find helpful, is like being able to step back a little bit and be like, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? And I really have to totally do that too. Like, am I
Yeah.
hungry? Am I tired? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Like they use that HALT
Yeah.
thing in AA, right?
I
Like
love
hungry,
that.
angry,
Yeah.
lonely, tired. Like, am I
Yeah.
hungry, angry, like, is it something that I can address? Or like, am I feeling drawn to low and earthly things? Am I feeling a decrease in faith, hope, and love? Like those are objective things.
Yeah.
That's what I find helpful, because then it's like I'm not relying on just my emotions or my, like, even though that's good information, like it's good, but then I'm like, it's like it's useful to have that kind of objective information, and it also, like, I find too what you're sharing too, Rachel, really helpful, because in that time of desolation, it is more like Ignatius says that it's like the bad spirit, which isn't just the evil one. It can be like our own earthly whatever tendencies, away from God or things like that. But the bad spirit is more active in that
Yeah.
time. And so
Right.
what does he want to do always? He wants us to be isolated. He wants us to
Yep.
feel like we're the only one who's ever gone through this and nobody will understand. He wants us to feel like
All the
if we
lies.
talk about it, then people are going to think that we're terrible, or like, yeah, all the lies, like
Yeah.
whatever he can do to kind of keep us in that isolation. So
Yeah.
I would just say it was inspiring hearing you talk today about your turning to other people for help and how helpful that is. I'm like, oh yeah, that's
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because we can forget that. Turning to
Totally.
Jesus and
Yeah.
turning to friends, like, so
Mhm.
Yeah,
important.
so it saves my butt, like, honestly, it really does. But, and also I was thinking, like, the thing that you were saying, Nicole, and wait, I'm totally writing that down, that hungry, angry, lonely, tired, like, that's such a helpful
Yeah.
thing. Just to, like, go, like, run through the
Right.
list,
Little
and because
list.
I also find, and when I'm in times of desolation, there is a specific temptation to neglect myself physically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That comes up, which I think is a really important one. Like, you kind of don't want to dress like, you kind of dress like a slob. You don't like do the healthy things like that you need to do about working out or eating right. And
Yeah.
like, you're kind of, I guess I can have McDonald's 3 times a day, every day for a week,
Yeah,
sometimes, not
yeah,
always, but there are times when you're sort of like, you just kind of give, in quotes, like give up.
yeah.
And it's a very physical giving up as well. And it's challenging, just like it's challenging to pray. I think it's challenging to recognize like that my day is a gift, my life is a gift. Like, still, I need to honor the gift of that. And I can find that hard sometimes. So this was also helpful for check-in for that, being like, okay, I don't have this temptation, because sometimes that temptation will come before I realize that I'm in a time of desolation. Like, oh, I just kind of want to give up on all the things
Yeah.
that are good for me, that God is calling me to do. And that's a good
Right.
sign for me to be like, oh, what's
This is
happening?
Can I just say also, maybe we could even add one other thing. So like if we're gonna put a W in front of that, like Walt, like
Walt.
WHALT, because W could be for like women's things. So if there's like any guys who are listening,
I was like,
but like
what are we talking about?
figure out, I was thinking like
PMS.
or like
Yeah, yeah. True.
Right.
Very
So
true.
honestly,
This is
true.
very true.
Right?
Then
That's a thing.
You're welcome.
So
because
if you
that is
guys,
a thing.
if you guys are listening, then that can be
But-
helpful for you to ask your wife if that's helpful for them.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a danger zone, because if a guy's
Yes.
like, oh,
you need to
that's a
talk to
W.
her about that, not when she's
You
experiencing
have to come up with
it.
a system.
Yeah.
Nathan
right.
and I have a system. He is allowed to ask me, do you think it's possible that this might be related to PMS right now? That is fine. He is not allowed. Well, I mean, I'm not trying to
Right.
anyways,
Yeah.
but it is not helpful for either of us if he says, I think this is probably, if he decides. But he's free to ask. This is what we have worked out.
And it is
and
a true,
it works
and like
well.
as women, I think we have to be humble and be like, totally, that is a thing, and it impacts us so majorly.
And actually, even if we call it PMS and just put a P, oh, what's
happening?
Knocked over my glass and
Oh,
my
boy.
other glass.
Oh,
in
no.
My lamp
Did it
and
spill?
My microphone. No, it was all empty, but like all in one thing. Anyways, all I was gonna say
That was
was
a great
we could
moment
use
for
the
the timing.
moniker of fault, like PHALT.
Yeah.
So, and
I
then
like
I
that
There you
better.
go.
threw everything all over
So
myself. Yeah.
PMS, hungry,
Angry,
lonely,
tired.
Yeah.
fault. I like that.
things.
Though that's
Yeah.
the woman version. Actually,
then
I guess
yeah.
the men version, if you're married, fault could also be.
Yeah, totally.
It's also applicable to you.
Am I feeling desolate because my wife is
Yes,
PMS?
it's PMS.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's entirely possible.
That's funny. All right. Well, listen, everybody. This has been, I have thoroughly enjoyed talking about this topic with you. Hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully you will remember fault or halt.
Yeah.
Take
You
that
know what's
away.
funny? I realized I forgot that this was the prayer part of our series. So another thing that's helpful, which you guys both mentioned, but I didn't like log it, is like, yeah, just prayer. Like actually just like prayer, just simple prayer, like Lord help me. Yeah, very helpful.
It's great.
The P could also stand for prayer. In our
That's
fault.
right.
There you go.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
All right. Well, listen, it was great to have y'all with us. We're grateful for you hanging out with us in Lent. And next week we will be looking at fasting. So the next couple of weeks after this, we're going to talk about fasting in terms of self-discipline and challenges around self-discipline. And then we're going to actually talk about St. Ignatius, even though we talked about him a little bit so far. So we'll look forward to chatting with you soon, everybody. Hope your Lent is going well so far.
God bless.
God bless you.
God bless. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Thicket. If you like what you hear, give us a rating and hit that subscribe button. We have new episodes every Monday with more stories and honest conversations about life when the going gets rough and the hope and humor amidst it all. We'd love for you to join our community on Instagram and Facebook at In the Thicket Podcast. While you're there, let us know how we can pray for you. God bless and see you next week.